Hello, people. Today we're going to do part two of my interview with Mr. Russo. And just so you do know, uh, he did an interview yesterday, and it was more on the issues that he was having with Bald Sicilian. But just so you do know, you lived quite an interesting life. You know, I watched a good majority of your Vlad interview. And one thing that I found out about you, Hootie, is the fact that you spent quite a bit of time in South America. Am I correct?
Mexico.
And so here, and one thing that you said in your Vlad that really made me think. You knew a lot of guys in the mob, but yet the Mexicans didn't really want you dealing with that segment because of some issues.
They didn't want to see because they thought I was one.
Right.
And I've always been considered one my whole life. You know, what a lot of people don't understand is, and I got this feedback, like, well, you know, he's not a made guy. How can he know? When you grow up with these people, and I'm going to start talking about older guys that are wise guys that are very well known. Sal Gambino, all right, let's mention him, right? He's a very good guy. He was a neighbor of mine, friend of mine, wise guy. Would never ask me to leave a room, a street corner, a pizzeria table, if he was having a conversation with another wise guy. It's just something that's built into neighborhood guys. Like, there's guys you can talk in front of, and then there are guys that not. They all used to call me the hoodlum. So, like, you know, if there was guys that were coming from another neighborhood or another crew, and they'd come to sit down and they got something to say, they always used to say, you know, like, point to me, because I didn't get introduced, so that means I'm not a friend. And they always, Hootie's a hoodlum. That guy's a hoodlum. Leave him alone. You know what I mean? So when you grow up in it, and there's a lot of guys like me. You grow up in that neighborhood, you grow up around that lifestyle, and you're a street guy. Now, if I was a 9-to-5 guy, I'd probably be asked not to come around, but I wasn't. I was a 24-hour guy, and they knew that. They knew that even though I wasn't inducted, that my beeper or my phone or my burner or my bell could ring at 3 a.m, and I'd be there. I was always.
And where were you born? Let's get into your young life. Where were you born? And I know that you came up from a pretty poor family.
Yes.
And so why don't you explain to me where you were born and how you became part of the life that was going to take you down a very serious road?
Well, I can tell you this. The first wise guy's hand I ever shook, and this was before kindergarten, was Sonny Francis. And there's actually going to be a show about that. So when your mother and your grandfather on your mother's side are jockeying for you to meet this man, he actually, it's funny because people always used to say Sonny doesn't go anywhere without 20 guys. At the time, Sonny was on the lam and he had 20 guys with him. It was like Sonny was a legend, you know. And my grandfather did some work for him. It wasn't necessarily around, but put work in. He was a scumbag murderer. My mother's father. My mother adored Sonny, loved him. Michael loved Michael. You know what I mean? And that's all my mother wanted me to be like. It was insane. My father, who he was from, his family was from Partonico in Sicily, and people are going to break my chops about the way I pronounce it. But he was born in Palermo. My mother's family came over a lot earlier. He came over in the 60s. His whole family was Cosa Nostra to the end. I talk about how, you know, Jimmy Burke had my father's cousin clipped. They used to play on the farm together back in Partonico, you know. So my father was Cosa Nostra, true mafioso, Totorina. He knew them all. Damo Buscetta. But hated the life, hated the mall, around them, talked about them. It was something, not that he had my mother in check, but she knew how to him because he hated it. She loved it. She was actually Vinny Sarah's kid's babysitter, my mother. She used to babysit Jerry, who's now, you know, one of the largest bosses in the family.
So you knew Sonny Francis. You knew all these very serious guys. So right away, did you know that you were you saying to yourself, I want to become one of them? I mean, that's usually what the kids, especially poorer kids from the streets, they admire these guys and they want to become one of them. Was that always your goal right from the very beginning?
My goal was never to be like my father.
And what was your father?
As they drove, it had nothing to do with the money they made because I knew I was going to do it. All I always used to tell myself, I just have to be old enough. I knew I was a kid. I didn't know the crack era was going to come along and every kid could become a millionaire, which happened, and I was part of that, but because of where I lived. But I just always used to say, I'll get that. I'll drive that car. When John was driving up and down 101st Avenue in the early 80s, and he used to drive an old town car.
Are you talking about John Gotti?
Gotti Sr.
Okay.
Brown. Lincoln. And it's funny because when he gets straightened out, you see him in the new Mercedes. Not straightened out, of course. They buy him the Mercedes, which I told the story about that with Joe Watts and the money glove compartment. But it comes. It comes. My mentor was driving around in a Buick.
And who was your mentor?
Ronnie One Arm.
Ronnie One Arm.
And I'll have love for that man till the day I die and after that. And I'll never have a bad word to say about him. To me, he was a real gangster. He was what he was. He wasn't anything else. And you know what? That's what I always wanted to be my whole life until I decided 5 years, 6 years before they pinched me, I wanted out of the life. But I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I still knew these guys. I still had guys that had beefs that would ask me to go to bat for them, to go to sit downs. So I really wasn't out. I had a huge bookmaking operation that was just taking off, but it belonged to me. It had nothing to do with Cosa Nostra. Cosa Nostra was dead. By 2010, Cosa Nostra was dead. I don't listen to nobody. These guys around like cowboys, like street gangs, killing each other. Whoever was left, shaking everybody down, robbing their own people, robbing their own bookmakers, ran out of money, robbed your own Shylock. They were doing the craziest shit, So I already knew. I watched it. I seen it. I lived it. So I knew.
Did you consider yourself a bookmaker or a drug dealer? Because it seems like you had your hands in quite a few things.
Well, it's so hardly because I have a thing for numbers. So bookmaking came easy to me.
Right.
I started with them about 14. By 15, there was 3 guys in the office. By 15, I was the only guy in the office. I was writing every bet, answering all 3 phones. You know what I mean? And then drugs was numbers as well.
And was this in Ozone Park?
Such a level that I tell you, I only worked 2 hours a week. The load would.
Was this Ozone Park that you were working in?
What's that?
Was this Ozone Park that you were working in? What area?
Ozone Park, East New York.
Right.
That's the whole thing when you ask me where I grew up. I come from Ozone Park. My older brothers, siblings, they're Brooklyn guys. My father was a Brooklyn guy. When my mother, their family immigrated here, they immigrated to Mulberry Street, Prince. They lived down there. My father's family was Bushwick and then 101st Avenue. So my mother, when they came closer, she lived in the pink houses. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the pink houses. You lived in Sheepshead Bay. You should know about them.
Yes.
Very bad projects. Me and guys like me and you couldn't walk in there, walk out with our lives out.
Exactly.
By drugs. But it used to be all Italian, majority Jewish, and some Irish and Polish. No, I couldn't believe it. And my mother lived there as a young girl. She got out young. And that was on the other side of City Line, which was the borderline between Brooklyn and Queens.
Yes.
Stop in Queens is Ozone Park. So just like Don Pepe, the restaurant was in Brooklyn and it moved to Lefferts Boulevard in Queens, the most famous restaurant for the baked clams. Just like, the Gottis, John Gotti had his gang before they were gangsters. They had a gang called the Fulton. I'm going to do a show on it. It was the Rockaway Avenue and Fulton Street Boys. And you had JoJo, Little Nicky Carrazzo, Ronnie One Arm, Lenny DiMaria, John, all of them, brother. I can go through all the names. They were the Eastern Parkway Boys. They were gangs. The Fat Andy wind up taking, the Eastern Parkway guys under his wing because he rose through the ranks up to the same level as Charlie Wagons, even though that's who brought him in. And John probably only respected 2 guys in all of Cosa Nostra. Charlie Wagons was one, and Neil Della Croce was the other.
And who did you have to answer to, Hootie?
Nobody.
Oh, you didn't have to give any. You
Never,
have to pay honor to nobody, or
never. If I didn't want to go to a sit down, I missed it. I used to get yelled and screamed at all the time. Friends that I call my brothers. I get a tongue lashing by Ronnie all the time. But if I had an appointment, I made it. If I had to go do something for him and take care of it, I did it. I was asked, a few times to do some favors for the boss of the family at the time. It got done. When I had to sit down with Bobby Glasses when he was boss at the time, twice. I never missed it. I was at both sit downs. Both went in my favor. I thank him for that. But yes, I you, did I have to answer to nobody? No, but yeah. Did I ever give an envelope? Never. Because then I'm just gonna shoot myself in the head. I'm not I'm never gonna be as good as my last envelope. I was never gonna be that guy.
and Ronnie One Arm was the guy that you pretty much put yourself around more
I
than the other bosses.
in the world. I was hanging around Peter Gotti, and to me, I mean, that's the major leagues. That's playing for the Yankees, right? That's playing for the Yankees, right?
Now explain who Peter. Who do you explain to people where what Peter Gotti was at that time and who he was? Which Gotti was he?
Legitimate tough kid from Howard Beach, and he kind of got a little bit older and a little smarter and realized that the kids in Ozone Park were tougher. The kids in Ozone Park were more loyal, and we wind up becoming good friends. Um, Anthony spoke about this during an interview with Michael about he said John's brother Richie's club. It was Peter's uncle's Richie's club, right around the corner from his father's club, and we hung out there all the time. For us, like I said, that was the major leagues. On Saturdays, we went across the street and seen Junior. Most of the time, if there's a boss in the room, you don't even get to shake his hand. So like a lot of these guys, when they say they're around bosses, most of the time you don't see them. When Pete was boss, we were there every Saturday. We broke bread. We talked. Favors, messages got passed. Favors got done when Uncle Pete was boss. So it was great, right? But then I realized I was playing for the New York Mets because being with Ronnie One Arm was playing for the Yankees. That was the guy. He was one
Right.
of the captains in the Gambino family, and
Now,
he was bred his son to be the
how
boss.
how respected was John Jr.? Did a lot of people feel like John Jr. only had that role because of who his father was, or did they?
Boss, there's nothing you can do about that. When you never did anything that people know about, you're only going to be known for that. You know what I mean? And now you got to remember, he stood at what his father gave the club to his brother Peter, which I was trying to tell you. The Bergen Hunt and Fish Club comes from Rockaway and Fulton Street because that was Charlie Wagon's club. John brought that club to 101st Avenue. The Bergen Hunt was originally from East New York. But when that whole enclave of Italians came over and took that whole beginning of Queens, which was Ozone Park, they brought everything with them. The pizzerias, the restaurants, the social clubs. And that's why I tell people, Paul Vario had a club on Pickett Avenue. This one had a cab stand over here. When they all came into Ozone Park, everybody had something on 101st Avenue. And I've said this in my interviews. That was Major League Baseball. That 101st Avenue, I don't care. People could talk about Bath Avenue, 18th Avenue. 101st Avenue was the largest conglomerate of Cosa Nostra in the world. On every block, there was a social club and a cafe. There's no neighborhood that ever had the boss of all five families in one spot. Never.
Right.
Except Ozone Park.
Now, when John Gotti was running stuff, once he went to jail, was that when things started going haywire and people started fighting over? Because John Gotti Sr. had a group of guys around him, and he was very well respected. Whereas you had these other guys after him. Is this when everything started coming apart?
You have to understand, the boss of the Lucchese family lived in Howard Beach. Gas pipe ruined that.
All right.
And, guys started defecting from the Jersey Crews. There was a lot. It wasn't just John. It just happened to be that era. Just not John Sr.
Did you know Gas Pipe? Did you meet Gas Pipe?
A lot of people that had a lot to do with it. Sav Talley, that guy, he was living in Howard Beach. he at his own will. He was, you know, how Sammy they said was going out and clipping guys at his own cost. Sal Vitale was just going out clipping everybody. You know, a lot of the people in the Benal family didn't like Sal, so he'd clip everybody, and that was that era. You know what I mean? Where he was a Mad Hatter. I think those guys piled up more bodies than any family. You know what I mean? And then you got the waterfront getting hit after Gotti got hit. You know, taking down the Genovese family. The Fulton Fish Market getting taken down. Finding out that the Genovese family had all these legitimate jobs, making $250,000 or better a year. These guys didn't even have high school diplomas. There was a lot that went on in that era because Rudy Giuliani was a crime fighter. He went after the largest and then after everybody else. So it just wasn't John. And I want to get back to one thing.
Yeah.
John Jr. was no punk. John Jr. was a fighter. He boxed. He knew how to throw his hands. The thing was, when he was younger, he fought with the kids from Ozone Park. So they never liked him. So when he became boss, they felt that they didn't have to give him respect because I used to roll around the streets with this guy and have to worry about one of his uncles or his father coming to clip me. So that had a lot to do with it. When you're a neighborhood kid and you're fighting in the park or you're fighting in the sandbox or you're fighting anywhere, and then one day you're the boss, it's very hard to live up to being the boss of the Gambino crime family, who was at the time the largest and most powerful crime family in the country.
Now, when John Jr. was the boss, do you think that John Jr. was intimidated because his father was John Gotti Sr. and he had to live up to that?
Intimidated?
Yeah, being that who his father was. You know, how can he replace his father? You know,
You're like living up to it?
Yeah, living up to it. Exactly.
I never seen it. John walked around with his head held high every time I seen him. Would always talk like a boss, act like a boss. I didn't see him, you know, a lot of people did say because Mikey Scars put a lot of rules into play. And, you know, people used to think that, you know, John kind of favored the Brooklyn fraction than he did us Queens guys. So there was a lot with that. I mean, John Sr., that's a tough one to live up to. So if you can't, there's really nothing that you could shame yourself for.
Do you think that guys like Casso, do you think that they were the major downfall of these families because of the violence?
That's where narcissism and sociopath is at its peak, because the guy thought guys like him, Gregory Scarpa, Roy DeMeo, they get this power where they feel that nothing's going to stop them. Nobody can stop them. Where I told you yesterday, I seen guys that had worth $500 million that couldn't get out of jail. Bernie Madoff was a billionaire, couldn't beat it. These guys, without that kind of money, thought they had one over on the government. And then you had these guys that said, well, you know what? At the end of the day, I'll go in and tell. You want to know why? Because I'm the guy that kills everybody. So who's going to come kill me? And that didn't work either. So yes, and it all comes down to narcissism. That's what it comes down to. These guys feel like they're invincible. You know?
Now you're in the drug dealing part of this. And there's always that rumor that the old timers didn't like the drug dealing. But the reality is they all had their hands out at the end of the day, taking in that big money. Would you pretty much say that's what it was? They all were getting money off drugs?
Everybody. Well, I mean, look at it now, right? The Chin, I explained this story about the Godfather Harlem. He wasn't even close to the same age as Bumpy Johnson. The Chin gets a 8 to 10 or 8 to 15 year bid for dope back in 1959 after he shot Frank Costello in 1957. And he winds up bunking with Vito Genovese. And that's when Vito Genovese makes him a capo regime. And he comes home, gets his own crew, takes over the West Side. These guys all went away for drug trafficking. The whole Gambino upper echelon. The last name, Gambino, who Carlo's name, were all dope dealers. The Pizza Connection. The Pizza Connection was all dope coming in from Italy, from Sicily. Right or wrong?
Lucky Luciano started Yeah.
Those guys were a Baldo model. That guy was Carmine Galante, one of Carmine Galante's bodyguards. So Carmine Galante, they clipped him because they didn't want him to get too powerful. It was like what they said in The Godfather. The drugs bring in the money brings in the power. Whoever's got the most of that is going to win all the time. And they were afraid of that. So when they went to the commission and they asked permission to whack a boss, that commission was very happy with that because they didn't realize they were only making themselves weaker by clipping Calandra because, he had all the Sicilians. No, he had the Sicilians making him money with the Papania game. Every boss, going back to Carlo's days, going back before Carlo, after Carlo, was selling drugs. There's nobody but I can't say they were selling drugs because my drug operation had nothing to do with Cosa Nostra. They didn't know what I did. They didn't know who I dealt with. What I did for them was I went out and I collected money from drug dealers. So I can tell you, yes, did they have their hand in it? 100%. I'm the guy that went out. And had to make sure if they didn't come up with the envelope or the envelope was short, they had to be taken care of. You know what I mean?
But Ronnie One Arm had to know what you were doing.
Of course.
Right.
Ask me.
And so why would a guy like Ronnie One Arm just come to you and say, hey, dude, you're making all this money off drugs. Why aren't you giving me something off of it?
Because we had an agreement that I would exchange for what I do, bookmaking, drug dealing. Nobody knew the scale that I was on, that I had corners, that I had spots. Nobody knew the scale that I was on. It just came down to Hootie can be utilized. Let's utilize Hootie the right way. He's in the streets. He's in the old neighborhood. He's in East New York. He's around all these drug dealers, the Spanish guys, the black guys, the Italian guys. Who else could we use? Anybody else, they'll know. Send Hootie. And if they won't pay, let Hootie take care of them. And
now you're 100% Italian Sicilian. Is that correct?
As long as favors got done.
And you're 100% Italian, right?
Sicilian.
Okay. So were they ever thinking about proposing you or making you or?
Well, I'm not going to sit here because it always sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but 3 times that I know of. And one of the times, Gene Barolo was in a strip club with Alphonse, the captain in my crew, and he told Gene I was on a bit, when Hootie comes home, we're straightening them out. So that was the first time it was spoken outside of my crew. Inside of my crew, it was spoken 3 other times to where even Ronnie was wondering why wouldn't, because his son was a captain at the time, why wouldn't he be passing your name around? Jealousy. They used the excuse because what happened was they couldn't go on with this deal or die rule that Carlo did. So what they did was, if you got pinched with drugs, not got caught selling them, not that they knew you were selling drugs, if you got pinched on a drug pinch, you got sheltered for 5 years. That means for 5 years, you were supposed to be shunned, but they put it where you couldn't get straightened out for 5 years. That was the.
Did you work? Now, you mentioned Gene Barolo. When did you meet Gene, and did you ever do any stuff with Gene?
Never committed a crime with him.
Right.
But I knew Gene's older cousin. He was more my age. Gene, I knew as a young kid. His family actually lived on my old, up the block from me in my City Line days. And then when I had the club at 80th Street Park, that was down the block from Fat Andy Ruggiano's house, where the wife lived at the time because Fat Andy was in jail. And I think Gene lived across the street from Fat Andy's other son, who was a legitimate tough guy in his own right. So I knew Gene since he was 8, 9, probably younger, but running around the block, running around the neighborhood, same guy, causing trouble, causing fights as an 8, 9-year-old kid. And I was 14, 15 at the time. And I had the numbers business and the bookmaking operation around the corner. So, and then as he got older and I got further into, Howard Beach, I bought a house in Centerville, they hung out there. And then he started hanging around kids that I did business with or kids that I helped out. I would, work too, as we would call it, to get them on their feet. Because I didn't like to deal with hand-to-hand stuff. I used to just like to get it, flip it, end of the story. And we grew close like that. I tried to mentor him a little bit in the drug game in the beginning. And then I just seen that he was going to be like his cousin. He was a wild one. He liked to play with the guns, liked to run in places. He liked to tie people up, and I was opposite of that, and I tried to mentor him as much as I could in that direction, which it's terrible anyway to mentor anybody into Cosa Nostra.
No,
But
you have these groupies online here, and they think they know you guys. The reality is this: honestly, was Gene Barolo feared on the streets?
if we had this question, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And how about would you consider yourself someone that was feared, or would you consider what would you consider yourself, say, compared to Gene Barolo?
Gene Barolo was more or less like he always had a pistol on him. He dealt with a different era. I didn't have to deal with that era of kids. The era that I dealt with knew just don't fuck with Hootie. If you do, there's going to be a problem. Because I was the type of guy that rang your doorbell if we had a problem. We were going to settle it. We were going to end it right there. Or it was going to be a lot worse for you if I had to. So all you had to do is not fuck with my money, not fuck with my family, and we're good. I was a neighborhood trademark. I've been around my whole life. From 101st Avenue to Crossway Boulevard to Jamaica Avenue to Woodhaven to East New York. I was a trademark around there.
I remember something you said to me one time before. Jimmy Calandra, when you were about to go on Vlad, I believe it was, Jimmy Calandra told you to ask you to mention his name. Now, Jimmy Calandra has a show that's pretty popular. Was Jimmy Calandra a tough guy on the street?
No.
You don't think so?
No, I know somebody that grew up. He wasn't a tough guy. What was his claim to fame?
That he was a Bath Avenue boy.
Right. Chris Petrello, the kid that came home, he was a tough guy.
Without a doubt.
Okay. Lino was a tough guy. Fabrizio wound up being the tough guy. I know he talks that when they were younger, he wasn't. Joey Cocco, legitimate tough guy, break your hole with his hands. You know what I mean? Jimmy's a big guy. I'm sure he knew how to fight, but he wasn't running around collecting money for people unless he was doing it and we didn't know about it. So I can't speak on that. He's no punk. I can tell you that. He'll fight you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Jimmy Calandra is not a punk. Don't think that for a second.
I don't.
He'll fight you. I know that for a fact. Me and Jimmy are good, and if we weren't good, I'd still tell the truth. You know what I mean? I know Jimmy was involved in businesses that I do not want to speak about. I know he's a married man now, and he's a father, and it's probably businesses that he doesn't want to think about. And he had to put a gun to a few people's heads to get them to do things. So he put some work in.
Okay, now let's get to John A. Light.
21 gone, so you can't. How long was his run? He went to what?
A couple years. How John A. Light? Now you hear a lot of things about John A. Light, and there's this beef going on between the Gaudis and A. Light. Why do you think that beef's going on? What's the biggest problem?
I didn't know that.
Now I'm talking about, Angel Gotti's always saying that he didn't know the father, he didn't know anybody. What is your opinion as an outsider, someone that understands the street? Was John A. Light a tough guy, or is he a phony?
All right. The best way that I can put this is, now, like I told you, I know John from being in the streets. I don't know John personally. Like I said, we've broken bread twice. Wise guys were scared of John. Okay? Killers would leave bars when John walked in. Killers, guys that I know shot people. I had a conversation once, and there was a kid running around. After all of this, we were all sitting around in a circle, and the kid just got done shooting like 3 people. He did this, he did that. And it was funny because right before John left Ozone Park, John put that kid in his trunk and drove around with him. So it was like John was a legitimate tough guy. Now, going down to the Gaudis, I don't know. I knew John when they owned a bar next on the same block as my father's cousin's barbershop, where father and sons, where my father's cousin was killed, called the P&M Pub. And I remember my mother, like, he was one guy that everybody would always tell you, stay away from, don't go around him. And he was a legitimate boxer. He used to box with Fat Andy's son, Albert, who was a legitimate tough guy with his hands. And he boxed. So besides being a killer, which he was, he could box. You know, he could beat you up with his hands. You know, and that's who he was. I tell people the story. I would have to cross the street because Sapienza was on the corner of his bar. That was the most famous sandwich place in Queens. And I used to have to cross the street to get my lunch for school and cross back over because my parents would tell me that they'd always read bullets flying through the windows at any time of the day, 6 in the morning, 6 at night. It was like a shooting gallery in there because that's the. So when you see legitimate tough guys, killers, not where you say legitimate tough guys that a guy was good with his hands and he beat a few people up. Killers was scared of him. The guy was a serious guy. Now, I wasn't at the Ravenite. I wasn't hanging out down at the Bergen in 1984, 1983. I was too young for that. So I can't vouch or talk for any of that.
Okay. So why do you think there's such a pushback on John A. Light when it comes to him telling his story? With John A. Light, there's one way. Either you believe him and you like him 100%, or you think he's full of shit. Why do you think there's such a thing going on with him right now?
Well, listen, he's always been a good-looking guy. He's always dressed well. He's always presented himself like a gentleman, regardless if he was shaking you down or stabbing you. And that's his persona now. He's just not being a tough guy anymore. He's writing books. He's doing documentaries. So they hear him talk. They see the way he walks. And you're behind a computer, so you can talk like that about people. So, and you also got to understand, listen, maybe the government wanted to put Gotti Sr. away. And I'm pretty sure whoever was on that last jury that convicted him, looking back at it now, didn't want to put him away. And I'm pretty sure 4 of those trials that Junior were on, he wasn't convicted because his father was. The Gottis have a huge following in civilians. They love them. So if you're against them or you're their enemy or whatever you want to call it, you're going to have a lot of people on here trashing you.
Without a doubt. Okay. So let's talk about you, Hootie. Now, explain this the best. And you and I, we had this debate once before, so I'm just going to get over it. And you'll hear this all the time. A lot of people will come forward and say, Hootie went to jail, snitched on some people to save his own ass. Tell us if this is true, and what do you, when you hear that, and if you want to answer those people right now, answer them right now. Tell them what you.
Exactly what I was in. I was in for almost 6 months. I was with 30 other co-defendants. I seen what was going on, which somebody, a captain right now, shelved because he was trying to manipulate the global pleas. I was bunkied with him. I knew what was going on. I knew my ass was going to be one to be thrown under the bus. So I reached out to my lawyer and I asked to be taken off the case. That a lot of times they don't do it. So they took me. They didn't put me in protected custody. They put me in another federal jail. They never sat down with anybody.
So you never gave any evidence toward anybody at all? Never testified?
You got me back? You hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
You got me?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me? Hello. Let me see. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Where's the volume?
No, you should be okay right now. I can hear you, no problem. Can you hear me? Why don't you go out and come back in?
I can't figure out how the volume went off.
Okay.
Blame JC. He called in and the volume went off.
Hey, go out and come back in. Okay, people. So he's going to come back in. So I'm hoping that we can go on and not just end the interview there. But interesting stuff. I enjoy talking to the guy because he seems like he knows what he's saying. Now there's rumors going around that he's been running around stoned and high, and this is the second day in a row he's been here. He hasn't been high. He hasn't been stoned. So what happens at nighttime, I can't say whether he is or not. But he's been a perfect gentleman yesterday, and he's been a perfect gentleman today. And unfortunately, he has to go out and come back in. I'm going to hope that we can get him on because it was just getting interested. And if we can't get him on, then we're going to have to go do a part 3. But I find the guy very interesting, and let me see right here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it happened, and let's make sure you blame him. JC called in, and it froze the screen.
Oh, JC always causing trouble.
Causing trouble, even when he's not supposed to be.
Yeah, and we were having a very good conversation. I was like, he better not ruin this conversation.
JC.
Okay, so let's get back to the basically, what you're talking about is a global plea.
I've been on them before. You know, the lower guys that are getting lower time that aren't part of the upper echelon, they stay on instead of pleading out early. So the guys on top will get less time. So say a guy 15 years, right? I could take an extra 2 to knock his 5 off. So he'll get 10. You know what I mean? But there was somebody in this circle that was manipulating the global plea in their favor and blaming other people. And this was a captain. He's sheltered for life now. But what I wanted to do was, I was out of the life 5 years, almost 6 years before the feds even came along. But again, like I said, I was bookmaking, but it shouldn't have been a federal charge. But each time it went back to 1991, so I understand. I did time twice for 2 of the counts they charged me with. So it's like now it's just me doing time again for what I did time for already. That's right. You can't beat these guys. You can't beat the government.
No.
Their own rules. How do you go back and do time that you did time for already?
How much time did you do altogether up to this point?
10 years.
You actually were inside for 10 years.
Not all at once.
Right. Okay. Now, where did you do any federal time, or was it state time, city time? Federal.
I was in Missouri. I spent a lot of time in MDC and a lot of time in MCC. Majority of my time I spent close because they didn't know. By the time that I even went in front of the judge, because what happened was, I wanted to throw myself on the mercy of the judge. I wanted to come forward, confess all my crimes, and let the judge give me my time. Well, Brett Baja, who was in charge of the Southern District at the time, was a racist piece of shit. And when I seen Donald Trump shaking his hand, I was beside myself. And then when Donald Trump fired him his second year in, I was so happy because he personally told me, I'm not letting you off the hook on anything. You will because you get a probation report when you go in, and ends 100. Usually it's like 133 years they recommend. And I just beat the government. I didn't beat the government. I just beat a mandatory minimum of 20 years. So if Hootie wanted to go bad, I would have went bad there because they called me a career criminal, meaning that I've been a criminal my whole life. Therefore, you have to go fight a case. One day it is, and the prosecution comes forward, I always say prosecution because of the state. An AUSA comes forward, presents his evidence to the court. Then my lawyer comes forward and presents his evidence. Tax returns, letters from prominent individuals in my neighborhood, things like that. And they want to give me 20 years just by saying that we know this guy's been a criminal his whole life, regardless that we haven't caught him doing anything. This is the sickest thing in the world. My whole case is the sickest thing in the world. There wasn't one piece of evidence. It's something you just never seen before. That you could just go to jail without evidence. But me, I'm the only person I don't even belong there, and I'm the only person looking at career criminal. So if you want to say I went bad, that's when you should have said I went bad. Because now I'm looking at a mandatory 20 years on top of whatever the government's going to give me on my drug charges, my Shylock charges, my bookmaking charges, and my extortion charges, right? So that's another 10, 20. You're talking about I'll be home when I was 80. So I went in and I fought it. And it came in my favor. it went against me getting bail. The AHA said, well, now you're not going to make bail. I was more happy that I beat the 20. Forget about bail. So for people to say that, they watched me come back. I was in the box at the time. We all were, most of us. And I was bunking with a captain who was actually a boss at one time. And they knew what I was going to fight. And I came back. So if I was going to go bad, why wouldn't I go bad then? Why am I going to go bad on a 10-year mandatory minimum? Because that's what I was looking at now after I beat that. And now we're going to run them together. So I just didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't belong there. I seen what they were doing. I seen guys that they were blaming. They were dry snitching in co-defendant meetings. That's a rat move. They were pulling rat moves all day long. And I'm like, this is what the life is. This is what, I mean, this wasn't the reason I left 5 years ago, but I'm glad I did. So Brett Baja came back with one of the worst deals ever, where I could have spent a lot of time. And a certain AUSA, he was the top guy at the time. Now he's huge. He's all over TV now. I don't want to mention him, but he's huge. And he's a correspondent for a very big company. Said to me, we'll take you back to your unit. Don't take the deal. It's one of the worst deals I've ever heard. Like, they weren't even pressuring me to go in and tell. This was a cop-out case. There was nothing to tell on. This was a case where everybody pleads out. Because if you don't, you get 100,000 years. So
were you always in Hootie? Were you always in population?
Always.
Okay.
Never seen. I got picked in 2015 when I came home, and I was in Gen Pop. Frankie Pasquale was there. Gene was there. The kid that died, the lunatic that Gene was. They were all there when I was there. I was in the 5 building. I was on the boat, and I was complaining. The boat, they call it the Love Boat. It's part of Rikers Island, but there's no movement, and there's less fights, there's less trouble, but you can't move, you can't go to the yard, you can't work out. I don't want to live my life like that. So I fought with these COs every day till they got me moved. And to get back at me, it's the drug building, the 5 building, and it's one of the worst buildings you can ever go to on Rikers Island besides the Beacon, because it's the most red lights, meaning the most.
So you see, now this is one thing. If you've been in Rikers Island, you know what the Beacon is. You know what the Annex is.
Oh.
I've been on Rikers Island, so I know where those are. So do you, how much time did you spend in the Beacon?
I spent the whole summer and the beginning of the fall in the Beacon.
As a white guy.
Not only the only Italian, the only white guy.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty tough. That I know for sure.
Listen, I got into 2 fights while I was there, and they gave me my respect.
You have to fight.
I didn't get cut. I kept my commissary. Visits were good. 2 fights. That's all.
Did they eventually transfer you to the Annex?
I bailed out.
Oh, you bailed out. Okay.
Yeah. No, what would I get? Why were they going to transfer me to the Annex? They wanted me to die there.
Well, because when they take you out of the Beacon, they usually put you somewhere, and a lot of times
Beacon until you go to your sentence, and you go to the 4 building, and the 4 building you go upstate.
Right.
Now, if your classification changes, you know how that works. If you're there, is the 30s the highest. I was a 27, and you drop to 19. Then you go to an easier part that which you probably call they used to call it the projects, because you know how the odd sides were bad. 11, 13, 15, 17. Those were the bad buildings. Then the other side, they said I never made it. I was in the Beacon. I was right before there was like another building next to me, and then the water. You could see the water. You could see over to LaGuardia Airport, I think. I'm not sure, because it's the last building.
Yes.
So you're always first to get picked up. So it's 2 a.m. court, not 3 a.m. because you're the first to get picked up. And that 9 o'clock bus heading back from court, you're the last to get dropped off. And it's a big beige building with red crust, on the ends of it.
Yeah, I got transferred from there over to Valhalla, and they put me in M unit, which usually meant you were going upstate. And at the last minute, the judge let me have time served, a miracle. And but I was like 3 to 5 years waiting in M unit, thinking that I was going to go upstate. I mean, it was that close. So How many times do we hear that though? Where people are getting ready to be transferred upstate, and by some luck, they don't go.
I don't think I've ever heard someone that was getting ready to go upstate and don't go. I can say
That-
got a case and they changed it because they found out some evidence, but I never heard anybody that was getting ready to go up and get a number not get it.
Well, what happened with me is I had some restitution. I was arrested in upstate New York, and they brought me down to Valhalla, put me in M unit because they thought I was going to do 3 to 5. But I paid my restitution. Back then, they didn't have the computers where everything's up to date.
Oh, okay.
Now everything's up to date.
Yeah.
And so when I went in, the judge even said to me, "I don't see this anywhere. Your probation officer better be in here tomorrow, or you are going upstate." They brought me back the following day, and my probation officer from Yonkers was there, and they dropped it just like that. But I spent a good amount of time on the run, and that's why they dropped my case too, because the judge said to me, "Well, you spent all these years on the run. That's like being in prison itself," and it is.
All right. If I ever, that's the one thing they always told me, please don't ever go on the run because you're going to get 10 times the amount that you
Every time you see a car pull up behind you, you don't want to drive. You don't want to get in a car because they pull most people over that are wanted. They get busted in cars.
I wouldn't even going. I'm going to jail and get my time over with. I'm not going on the lam.
And a lot of people don't realize being in New York City.
Nobody. I don't care how much money.
And New York City is the best place to be on the lam because
that's the only place they're not looking for you.
Yeah, and there's subways, there's buses. You don't have to be in a car.
True.
Yeah. Upstate New York, you got to drive.
Valhalla. Everybody loved. For some reason, everybody wanted out of Orange County and into Valhalla.
Well,
I was up there and I was getting checked in to fight a warrant. I told this story before, and the CO kept asking me where Rico was. And I kept saying, "What are you talking about?" "Well, you're here by yourself. Where's Rico?" Because they called me out of the cell. Russo and Rico. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's going, "Well, there's a Rico on here, and I only got Russo. My charge was Rico." I says, "I'm on a Rico charge." Listen, you know how these guys are upstate. They ain't have the holes in the fucking one. This guy thought that I had a co-defendant with me named Rico. I tried what Rico was. And he had no idea that there was a RICO charge in this country. So that goes to show you who we're paying to babysit us.
And when I was in Valhalla, it was the old unit. They were just rebuilding it. It was 89. You did not want to stay in the old unit because those units were like almost 100 years old. But everybody wanted to go into the new buildings in Valhalla because it was a vacation. But unfortunately, I was in the M unit, which was an old one, with the old brick door, with the old doors, and when they shut them, you got a little tiny gap in the front and stuff. But you're right. Now it's like being in Valhalla now is like a joke.
Yeah. Listen, I think all those upstate jails are just awful. You lock little thing, Orange County, all the lock in, food's on its way, mess is on its way, cleanup time, everybody. It was like a lock in every half hour. It was the most annoyingest thing in the world.
I also spent time on an Indian reservation in one of their jails. If people want to see a bad jail, go to an Indian reservation. Don't ever do a crime on an Indian reservation because you don't want to be, because when you go into those, Native Americans hate white people. So
and
when
you think they're going to have funding for jail? Yeah, I'm not looking to commit any crimes to begin with. Nevertheless, to do it on a Indian reservation.
So, are you ever worried now that you're an older guy that you are going to commit crimes because you're broke or you need money? Do you ever fight those demons?
I say this and I say this all the time. I came home. I started with one job at minimum wage. Got a second job at minimum wage. At one point, I was working 3 jobs, making minimum wage. Nothing can ever make me commit a crime again. They'll have to come and get me and lock me up and say that I didn't admit to all of my crimes because they're not ever going to get me. I didn't want to begin with. I have no feeling whatsoever. I want to be a legitimate businessman. I want to produce. I've been writing. I wind up finding out that I'm a very good writer. Didn't know that I had that skill. No, No, I'm into so many other legitimate things. It didn't cross my mind since the first day I came home.
And you're not on no paper now, nothing.
No paper. That's
Well,
not.
and I went 10 years without committing a crime, and then I committed a crime when I got older. So
I can
just
tell you, when I got put back on Rikers Island in 2015, I wasn't that old, but Rikers Island and a lot of those jails, it's a young man's game.
and those prisons is yeah.
Gentlemen,
Rikers Island's worse now than it's ever been because of the
gentlemen, I had them calling me OT, old, and it's like old timer, like how much, and it's just these young kids running wild, no respect, they don't care, they got no law, they got no rules, they don't stand by anything. The world shit on them, the world did nothing for them, the world owes them everything and didn't give them anything. It's just not a place for guys our age anymore. It's not.
I'm gonna have to bring up one of your favorite guys now. What is it with all this hate going on from Stacks toward you? Because it's I thought it would mellow out. It's been 7 months since I've been around it, and it seems like it's as bad now as it's ever been.
Is it? I don't see videos, so I don't know. Are they really? They're still talking about me and him, or is he still
Well,
talking?
Stacks ain't never gonna stop talking about you. He talks about me all the time. It's
He wants to cut my face off and walk around with it and wear it. Guy's obsessed with me. You know what I mean? I wanted nothing to do with this guy, right? A friend of mine said to me, "Pick something, come out and help it." So he was part of a drug rehabilitation center. So I picked a former drug addict. It had to be Stacks. Stacks was jealous of my show with JC. I let all of that go, all of that fly. I was eventually going out on my own. I was eventually going to be producing on my own. I was writing. None of it was going to last anyway. I just wanted to give them both a head start. If my name could help them, let it help them. Stacks would use his recovery. I got off work at 8:30 in the morning working for FedEx. I had to be back at work at 4 at my other job. So I didn't even have time to sleep. This guy had me on the phone. I need you. I need to talk. I talk to him. I do a video with him every day. I did everything I could for him. Embarrassed me at Vlad. What an Vlad told me. He actually wrote Vlad to try to get on, and they wrote me back a thing making fun of him. Oh, my God. They said, "Are you kidding me? This kid wrote in that he wants to come on the show." They said, "We wouldn't let him clean the toilets." They abused him. The guy, he made himself look like such an idiot, and for no reason. He called me up one day, and he was high as a kite, talking about, "You got to leave the JC show and only work with me," and giving me orders. And I'm like, then I find out, and so you're going to hear it all right here, because I didn't know this was still going on. It was supposed to be my channel, the Hootie and Stacks channel. He had rapping with Stacks or doing dope with Stacks, learn how to use a syringe with Stacks, whatever it was called. And he never changed it. He only put the name up, Hootie and Stacks show. He never put the name in my show, and he never put the show in my name. So if there was ever any money or anything contributed, he got it. Nothing was in my name. So I get an email from somebody close to him. I never exchanged numbers with this person. They called him up to hang out, and he said these exact words. And I'm not disrespecting nobody's mother. I'm not disrespecting anybody except him. In the summertime, poor people would go and buy a movie ticket so they can sit in the movie theater all day in the air conditioning. That's what we used to do. Yep. Dax told this person, "I can't hang out because I'm going to the movies with my mother to smoke crack." So I called Stacks up and told him, "Listen, he lives like 3 hours away from me. He doesn't even know how to take the train. So I'll drive there. I'll get you back into rehab, get your shit together, 30 days, whatever you need. You've been through this, you can beat it." Oh, smoking crack's not like heroin. Now, he's a 43-year-old man who has COPD and emphysema. His family doesn't even understand how he lived through COVID. Because if he would have got COVID, he would have died. This is a 43-year-old man with COPD, with emphysema. He walks up a flight of stairs. That's what I love when he's calling people out to flight. 3 steps, and he's got to hold on and wait and rest 5 minutes because he can't breathe, because he's shot from smoking crack, from smoking cigarettes. And I try to take this kid to rehab. So the show ends. He gets into a conversation with JC. JC says he spoke to somebody that said they sent me money to help me with audio equipment. That's when you got that there was a $2,000 discrepancy and I robbed Stacks.
Right.
Where JC said it was $500. That's what it was, but the money wind up never getting donated. The man told JC that's what he wanted to do for Hootie. It had nothing to do with Stacks. Stacks is nobody. The man wanted to donate $500 to Hootie, which wound up not happening. And JC had that conversation. So how this whole thing got blown up, I have no idea. But then he went on with my ex-wife. He mentioned her name. He put up fake paperwork that was docketed, that was part of the lawyer's office. Because if he would have put up a docketed paper up that was presented to a court, him and my ex-wife would both be locked up. Because you can't give any information to nobody. They would give him my name. They would give him my information out. They were using family court papers as papers of agreement papers. If people would have looked at it, it was a family court paper that never made it to family court. Didn't even make sense. But they were using that, saying that was paperwork on me. So he went down a rabbit hole that he should have never went down, because he's somebody I can never forgive. You know, JC crossed the line on a few things, but I never went back at any of them. I did one episode going back at Stacks to explain everything, but I guess people didn't listen. And I never did anything about with JC because he didn't really cross the line. So we were able to mend our relationship. Me and Stacks, we could never.
Right.
But there was never no money. And if there was, he had the channel. I left him with 1,800 subs. So it was always in his name. If he's still talking about me, then he's obsessed. But he'll never get on a train. He's never been anywhere in his life. He came here once, and I drove him home. I paid for his food, his clothes. I took care of him because he couldn't. You know what I mean? He can't afford a train ride now. He posted that he was going to do Vegas, some type of tours a year and a half ago. He hasn't left his basement. Where's these tours that he's doing? There's the biggest. These guys, they all are. Not just, they're the biggest bullshit artists around. They're swindlers. That's all they are. They're all swindlers. Anything they can get over on somebody, like when you hear about him talking to church, he called me up and said, you know what? I think Christ, church can help me. I said, that's great. That's beautiful. I says, there's something for you to do. And then he asked me, can I go there at this time? Do I have to go when there's mass? And I told him, no. I said, you can go in and light a candle. You know, he was going to a Catholic church at the time. You can go in and pray. I says, but there's certain days if you want to go to confession, you got to look when the priest is there. You know, they say things, during the mass, and they make this certain signs. I don't know what to do. And I told him all the things to do. Now all of a sudden, he's a preacher and a holy roller. He didn't know anything. So me, that's a swindler. Okay, you want to find God? You want him to help you? Well, if you're running around acting this way, then you didn't find God and you didn't let him help you. I'm not knocking it, but if you did it and you did it the right way, I'd be proud of you and I'd forgive you. But you didn't, and I'll never forgive you.
Well, let's hope that it works out for everybody. I'm sorry.
I'm not one of those guys. I don't believe in peace. You'll never see me do that. Fuck it. We need to have wars. Things need to end. There needs to be order. All this, let's hope to work it out, is all bullshit. All right? You need chaos before we can have peace. It's all bullshit. Nothing's going to work out. He's a garbage pail.
Okay, well, and one more question before we go. We've been doing this for an hour. And I first of all, I want to thank you because you're very interested and we could talk all, I know I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg with you. But what do you want to say? Tell us something about your channel. And I know that you'd like people to sub to you. You had quite a few subs and then you lost a lot of subs. Now you're starting to get them back. Is that right?
No.
No, you rebranded though, right?
No, it was always Hootie Social Club.
It was always Hootie Social Club.
I went Hootie and JC and Hootie and Stacks to rebrand it to the Hootie Social Club and started that from the beginning.
So it's just you now, basically.
Correctly.
Okay.
Yeah. But I did, it rebranded myself, and I started it all over from the ground up by myself and built it up to 3,200, So, listen, if you want to listen to content, come over to Hootie Social Club on YouTube. If you want to listen to gossip, go turn on TMZ. That's not what you're going to get with me. I'm the only guy out here that's giving it. Come on. You're going to get a great story. It's going to be a true story, and the content's unbelievable, and nobody tells it better than I do.
Well, I like talking to you, and I appreciate everything that we talked about, and I'm sure we'll talk some more. I haven't really gotten to know you, but the more I get to know you, the more I respect you. And a lot of myths and lies are created about people, especially on YouTube. I go through it all the time.
Watch them or read them. I have no clue because I don't pay attention to any of it.
Well, God bless you then, I'm
message and I can't open it. I have no idea what they're saying.
Well, that's a great idea. Well, I'd like to thank you. Once again, I'm going to put this video down. Your video yesterday did really well. People liked it. We got a great feedback.
Great.
And I just wanted...
You got a great listener, so I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, well, I hope that you were happy with our interviews, and
I wouldn't have came back on if I didn't.
Okay, well, you take care of yourself. I appreciate everything, Hootie.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye. Okay, people, that's Hootie. There's so much more we could do here with me talking to him. But, you can only touch so much with these guys. These guys have lived pretty exciting lives. The fact of the matter are, they are from areas. They have been around these gangsters, and it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not, because only they know whether it's the truth. Now, with Hootie, Gene Barolo, there's a lot of controversy, but one thing you can't take away from any of them is that they were around guys in the life. Unfortunately, everybody started ratting on each other because they were looking at long sentences. And in the end, the biggest gang of them all won, the United States government, the real mafia. But anyway, thank you, people. And I hope that you enjoy this. And I'm just hoping that you enjoy the content. Everybody.